If you are new to project management or aspire to be a project manager, start incorporating these words into your vocabulary and people will start to view you as a project manager. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If we haven't met yet, my name is Kayla, and this is where we talk all about project management, but we also talk about being a freelancer. We talk about working in startups. There's all kinds of fun stuff happening here. And if this is something you're interested in, I would love to invite you to subscribe. And I also want to ask you to please let me know what questions you have about these topics so I can make sure I'm talking about things that are interesting to you. Okay, on to today's topic. I am so excited about this one because this is the video I wish I had when I was starting out in project management. Today, I am going to walk you through the top 10 terms that I believe you absolutely must know as a project manager. These are the terms that you need to incorporate into your vocabulary so that you can be seen as a project manager. Now, when I first started out in project management, I didn't know any of this. I hadn't read any books. I hadn't worked with project managers. I was just kind of stumbling my way through it. And my whole purpose for starting this channel is to help others who are in similar positions as I was, project managers who maybe feel a little lost or maybe feel not quite ready. This video is going to be really helpful to you. It's also going to be helpful if you work in a more of a support role to a project manager. Maybe you're a project coordinator. Maybe you're a project admin. This is going to be really helpful for you so that you can understand what these words are that project managers keep using over and over again. This is it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a more formal definition for the word. I'll probably flash that across the screen there. But then I'll also walk you through like how this looks in the day-to-day of a project manager, how we throw this word around, what it means to us, to give you a little more context about how it's used and how you can start using it in your project management work. All right, before we get started, I just want to remind you to please like this video if this is something you're interested in. And if you're a project manager and you're interested in getting some more guidance, support, mentorship, go over and visit my website at www.kaylamcguire.com. Okay, so the first term that I'm going to cover here is actually two different terms. We're going to talk about waterfall versus agile and what that means to you as a project manager. Now, I did a more in-depth video on waterfall versus agile, so if you haven't yet, I recommend you check that out. But just to give you like a quick overview, as project managers, we have different methodologies. We have different ways that we might manage different types of projects, depending on what that outcome is, what our teams look like, all kinds of stuff. So two of the more popular ways to manage projects are waterfall versus, I'm going to use the word agile, but agile is really a more iterative approach. So we could say waterfall versus an iterative approach, but I'm using the word agile because that is a word you're going to hear a lot as a project manager. And we seem to just kind of plug in the word agile when we're talking about a more iterative approach. So with waterfall, we're talking about managing the project in a very linear fashion, a very sequential fashion. So if we know that we have one step that needs to be done before the next, before the next, before the next, that's a waterfall approach. Now, when we're talking about a more agile approach or an iterative approach, we're really developing a product over time. This is very common in software. So when we're talking about software development, this is where we often use an iterative approach, where we develop and release, and then we kind of review that, and then we develop some more and improve, and then we release, and we just keep making improvements and delivering over time. There's not as much of like a linear approach, a sequence to it. So that's really what we're talking about when we say waterfall versus agile. Hi, I'm Kayla from the future, here to talk to you about our second term, which is project lifecycle. Now, project lifecycle is simply the different phases or actions that we're taking to get that project to completion. Now, if I was being super theoretical, we could go down a very deep rabbit hole about what a project phase is versus a life cycle and all of this kind of stuff, but we are not being technical with this conversation. I'm giving you a very high level overview about how you might see these words show up in your work as a project manager. If you're looking for a more technical deep dive, this is not for you. With that being said, in general, the phases of a project are going to be something like initiation, planning, monitoring and control. Sometimes you have execution rolled up into that, and closing. I made a video about this earlier and how I manage a project through those phases. If you haven't checked it out, I would recommend you do. So those are typically our phases of the project. The reason why we talk about life cycle and sort of the differentiation between those phases in the life cycle is that your life cycle can be different depending on what type of industry or what type of project that you're working on. So for example, a software development project is going to have a different life cycle than like a construction project or like a video production project. They're going to have different actions that you take to get that project through to completion. But when we're talking about the life cycle, that's what we're saying. We're saying what are the different steps or actions or phases that need to happen to push that project through to completion. Okay, our next word is a little bit easier. Our next word is scope, and you'll hear project managers throw this one around all the time. And usually when we talk about scope, we say something like, oh, this is in scope, or this is out of scope. Now, scope is simply a way for us to set boundaries on our project in terms of like goals and deliverables and that kind of stuff. We need a way to set boundaries. So our scope is a way of doing that. If we have a clearly defined scope, parameters around our project, we know what fits in there, and we can control the different elements of the project like time, cost, and quality by keeping a control of scope. Now, along with scope, you may also hear a term that us project managers really like to use, which is scope creep. Now, scope creep is a way of describing this activity that tends to happen with projects where the scope sort of starts to get out of control in almost like an insidious way. Like you don't really know it's happening unless you're paying really careful, close attention. And before you know it, like you've fallen way out of scope with your project and you're working on some other idea that wasn't even related to that first project. So when we talk about scope creep, and when project managers talk about paying attention to that, we're really saying pay attention to what requests are being made, what agreements we're making to people to deliver this thing, to make sure that we're only doing the things that we have decided that we will do for this particular project. Now, our fourth word is deliverable, and you'll hear this one a lot too from us project managers. We always like to talk about our deliverables. Now, deliverables are really just that quantifiable good or service that is provided usually at the end of the project. We're going to have that deliverable. So let's say we have a project where we're creating a video. The deliverable will be the video. That's what we're working toward throughout this project, is that deliverable. Okay, now our fifth term is statement of work. And you may also hear this referred to as SOW, like with a capital S, lowercase o, capital W. Statement of work is simply a document that defines the parameters of the project. So you'll find within a statement of work, you should have a clearly defined budget, a timeline, you should have clearly defined scope, you should have clearly defined deliverables so that everyone knows what this project is about, what, we're on the same page with the project. Now, if you work in an agency, you'll probably see statement of work even more often because your statement of work is really that project initiation document. And typically it's signed by a client. Once they sign that statement of work, you know that the project is about to begin. Okay, now our sixth word is requirements. Requirements refers to the different tasks or items that are required to get started on the project or required to complete certain aspects of the project. So you may hear us as project managers say like, okay, let's have a discussion about the requirements, or we have requirements that we need from the client or from this stakeholder or that stakeholder. And really what that means is there's certain pieces of information that we need so that our team can continue to build that deliverable. So if we're talking about, again, a video, it may be something as simple as like, a brand asset, like a logo, something that we need from the client so that we can incorporate that into our deliverable. Requirements could also be simply information that we need from someone. Maybe it's like, login credentials or some sort of like a password or access to something. That could also be a requirement. Okay, our seventh word is stakeholder, and I've already used this word in the video, so you know this is an important one for project managers. Now, a stakeholder is simply a person who has an interest or a party who has an interest in the project. A stakeholder could be someone internally at your company. It could be like a CEO. It could be someone from a different team. It could be anyone from your company, right? A stakeholder could also be someone externally. So when we're talking about agency project management, we often talk about our external stakeholders as clients. That's typically what we call them in an agency environment. But those clients are our stakeholders. Now, often the clients that we work with on these agency projects have stakeholders at their companies that they're answering to. So you can see the stakeholder thing really can get carried away. Okay, our eighth term is change request. And this one is really important. Change request is a request to alter a part of the project. And a lot of times, what's interesting about change requests is they don't really show up in a formal way. They show up in a scope creepy kind of a way. Change requests and scope creep often go hand in hand. And scope creep isn't inherently bad, by the way. Scope creep is only bad if we don't know it's happening or we're not paying attention to it happening. But a change request is a request from a client that is going to really affect that overall scope of the project. So what we need to do with a change request is formally address that and have a discussion with our stakeholder about how that's going to affect the project time, cost, and quality, right? So we need to have those formal controls in place for change requests. Now, our ninth term is really two different terms, but I wanted to talk a little bit about each of these because you hear these a lot in project management, and depending on what kind of project management you're doing, you might hear one of these more than the other. Okay, so our first term is use case. And use case is a term that you're going to hear a lot if you're working in software development, software project manager. You're going to hear about use case. And use case really refers to how a user is going to use your product. You're looking at it from the eyes of the user to make sure that you're building something and developing something that is going to provide value to them. So a use case is usually written out and it will describe the steps maybe the user takes to use your product. Okay, the second term I want to cover here is business case. And business case is referring to the reason why you're moving forward with this project, the justification for moving forward with this project. You want to make sure there's a business case. You want to make sure there's a reason why. That's really all business case means, is like a reason why that is going to provide value to whoever it is that, this project is affecting. What's the business case here? Often you'll find that once you kind of dive into projects on the front end, maybe they don't need to be tackled in the way that you originally thought they would be. This is why business case is really important to think about, to consider how and why it will provide value to your customer or your end user. Okay, and our last term is milestone. Milestone is something we talk about a lot as project managers. We always want to make sure that we're hitting our milestones. This is the way you might hear us talk about that. A milestone is simply a specific point in the project that we have identified as, something significant or important that we can kind of build on. So for example, if we're talking about making a video, a milestone might be developing the script, right? A milestone might be building out the storyboard or something like that. Those would be our milestones where we've kind of completed a big chunk of work and now we could start on this next piece of work. And they're really just a way for us to measure project progress and to communicate that to people that we work with. Okay, those are my top 10 terms, things you absolutely must know as a project manager. If you are new to project management or aspire to be a project manager, start incorporating these words into your vocabulary and people will start to view you as a project manager. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any other questions about becoming a freelancer, leveling up as a project manager, breaking into project management, feel free to reach out. I offer one-on-one working sessions with project managers, and I also have a coaching program that I offer to project managers as well. You can find out more on my website, www.kaylamcguire.com. Or if you're a project leader and you need help with your internal project management, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you about that. Feel free to reach out. Again, you can find me on my website. I'll see you next time. Bye.